My name is Maya Bennett. I was 34 the night my father told me to take the bus to my awards gala because my sister deserved his attention more. I had zipped myself into the navy dress I had saved for 6 months, taped the blister on my heel, and placed my invitation beside the door. He had promised to pick me up at 6. At 5:17, he called from a Porsche showroom. "Take the bus," he said. "I'm buying your sister a Porsche. She has a real career." Then he made sure the blade went deeper. She had just closed a multi-million-dollar fleet account, he said. Her commission would be more than I probably made in a year, playing with delivery software. Behind him, my sister laughed and asked whether white leather would photograph better than black. I looked at the invitation naming me as a finalist for Austin's Emerging Business Leader Award. I could have corrected him. I could have told him why my attorney had kept me on 3 calls that afternoon, or why a $90 million wire was waiting on one final signature. Instead, I said, "Enjoy the car," put my silver heels in a canvas tote, and walked to the stop in Flats. 90 minutes later, my father sat in the Gala ballroom with the new key fob beside his champagne glass. My sister wore the satisfied smile of someone certain the room belonged to her. Then the host began describing the youngest chief executive ever honored by the organization. My hand shook beneath the table. When he mentioned the acquisition, my father stopped smiling. When he added one sentence about the Porsche delivered that afternoon, the key fob struck the marble floor. My father's face went white, and my sister's laugh died in her throat. Before I tell you why the host knew about that Porsche, and what my father tried to do after the key hit the floor, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far a bus ride like mine can travel. The bus moved north along South Congress, its windows reflecting my face over the city. I opened my phone to check the closing room one last time. At the top was a message from Priya Shah, Northline Mobility's general counsel. Escrow funded. Signatures verified. Effective at 6:02 p.m. Beneath it sat another message I had never deleted. It was 5 years old, 9 words long, and explained my family better than a decade of birthdays. "Can't risk my credit on a software hobby. Dad." I had received it at my parents' kitchen table with a limited guarantee form between us. Northline had won its first serious contract, routing delivery vans for a regional medical supplier. The client would pay in 90 days. My engineers, cloud bill, and insurance deposit were due in 30. A bank had agreed to a $60,000 working capital line if I brought in a guarantor with a longer credit history. I did not ask my father for cash. I asked him to believe the signed contract was real. That evening, Richard Bennett did not even read the financial model. He pushed the pages back with 2 fingers and said, "Logistics was a man's business. Software companies disappeared every week, and Lauren at least understood that a career meant selling something people could touch." Lauren was 26 then, 3 months into an entry-level sales job, and listening from the kitchen island while scrolling through car listings. She tilted her screen toward him and said, "Clients judged success before they heard a pitch." 4 days after refusing my guarantee, Dad co-signed her $82,000 Mercedes lease. He sent me a photo of her beside the bow with the caption, "This is an investment in her future." That was the single night I almost quit. Not because the bank said no, but because some stubborn, childish part of me had believed a signed enterprise contract would finally make my father look at me without seeing a phase I would outgrow. I did not quit. I sold my 7-year-old Honda, covered 6 weeks of payroll, and negotiated invoice financing at a rate that made me ill. For 3 months, I rode buses to warehouses with a laptop in one bag and steel-toed boots in another. Dispatchers did not care about elegant code when a refrigerated truck was late, and drivers did not care about investor language when an app added 12 minutes. I sat beside them, rewrote the product around what failed, and won the renewal. There was only that kitchen table repeated in 100 rooms, someone sliding risk toward me, assuming I would fold, and me finding a way to carry it. Northline grew because we saved fuel, reduced empty miles, and told the truth when our system broke. By the time competitors noticed us, our software coordinated more than 40,000 commercial vehicles across 6 states. The Auto Group acquisition was not a vanity purchase. Our customers kept telling us the same thing. Route optimization meant little if a van waited 12 days for a repair. Apex Ridge Auto Group owned 12 dealerships, 4 commercial service centers, and the best parts distribution network in Central Texas. Integrating those service bays with Northline's fleet platform would let a broken vehicle reserve parts before it reached the shop. The purchase price was $90 million, funded through a mix of Northline equity, acquisition debt, and a minority investment from a pension fund. It had taken 14 months of audits, lender negotiations, and regulatory review. Because Apex Ridge was privately held, every person with access to the deal, including me, had signed strict confidentiality agreements. My family knew I worked in delivery technology. They had never asked enough follow-up questions to learn that I had founded the company, still held controlling voting rights, or had become chief executive 3 years earlier. There was one complication I had disclosed before we made our first offer. Lauren worked inside Apex Ridge's commercial fleet division as a senior account executive. She introduced herself socially as a regional director, and Dad repeated the title until he believed it. But her actual job was to develop accounts and earn commission on completed fleet contracts. I told the board about the relationship in writing, recused myself from every discussion involving her employment, and asked the independent audit committee to review all related party transactions after closing. That step was not revenge, it was governance, and it applied to every employee connected to former owners, vendors, and consultants. Still, when Dad bragged from the Porsche showroom that Lauren had closed the biggest deal in her division, I felt the closing documents acquire a second weight. A fleet contract large enough to generate the commission he described should have appeared in the diligence data. I had seen no such clean deal. The bus crossed the river. I put away the old rejection text and opened the Gala invitation. The organizers had coordinated the acquisition announcement with our lenders and communications team. The transaction would become public during the award presentation, minutes after the legal closing. Dad had been invited because I had reserved 2 family seats months earlier, before I admitted how little he knew about my life. Lauren took the second seat after my mother chose a charity dinner in Dallas. They assumed I had received a spare corporate invitation and spent the week explaining what I should wear so I would not embarrass them. I had kept hoping the ride to the gala might become one quiet hour in which my father finally asked what I did. Instead, he chose a showroom. As the bus announced my stop, I folded the invitation, changed into my heels, and understood something that hurt more than the insult. The $90 million acquisition would shock him, but it could not create the father I had been waiting for. The ballroom at the Fairmont Austin was already glowing when I arrived, 7 minutes before the doors closed. I checked my canvas tote at the coat desk, wiped a streak of road dust from one heel, and entered beneath a screen displaying the night's finalists. Northline's Chief Operating Officer, Nina Patel, spotted me from our table and started to rise. I shook my head. I did not want a rescue scene. She squeezed my hand when I sat down and quietly said the closing had posted. Around us, founders, bankers, city officials, and investors leaned across white linen to exchange cards. At table 12, my father held court as if the gala had been arranged to display Lauren's new car. The Porsche key lay beside his glass. Lauren was showing a sales executive photos of the white Macan parked under the hotel lights and describing her landmark fleet deal. Dad caught my eye, glanced at the chair beside Nina, and mouthed, "You made it." With the pleased surprise people reserve for a delivery that arrived despite poor instructions. I had negotiated hostile boardrooms without notes. I had once told 200 employees that a funding round had collapsed and then found a bridge in 72 hours. Yet when dessert plates disappeared and the host, Evan Brooks, approached the podium, my pulse began striking the base of my throat. For one irrational second, I considered slipping through the service door. If I stayed seated, the announcement could belong to the company instead of to me. Dad would learn from a press release in the morning, and I would not have to watch his face rearrange itself around my value. Nina seemed to read the thought. "You don't owe anyone a smaller version of tonight," she whispered. My fingers were trembling against the napkin. I placed both palms flat on my knees and counted 3 breaths. The fear was not that I would fail walking to the stage. It was that I would succeed, and the little girl inside me would still turn toward table 12 hoping her father looked proud. Evan announced the final award. He spoke first about a founder who had built a fleet technology platform from one medical supply route into infrastructure used across 6 states. The room quieted. He described a leader who had spent her early years riding public transit between warehouse clients after selling her own car to make payroll. Dad's forehead creased. Lauren's smile remained, but it had become fixed. Then Evan looked directly at me. "Tonight's emerging business leader is also the youngest chief executive in this program's history. Maya Bennett, founder and CEO of Northline Mobility, has closed the acquisition of Apex Ridge Auto Group for $90 million. Applause rose around me. For a beat, I could not stand. Nina touched my elbow, not lifting me, just reminding me that my body was still mine. I rose on legs that felt disconnected from the floor. At table 12, Dad stared at the screen, where Northline Mobility acquires Apex Ridge Auto Group now appeared beneath my photograph. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Lauren looked from the screen to me, then gave a short laugh meant to signal that she understood some private joke. Nobody joined her. The laugh stopped. Her jaw tightened so hard that a muscle flickered near her ear. Evan waited for the applause to settle. "This acquisition brings 12 dealerships and 4 commercial service centers into Northline's network," he continued. "And because Austin occasionally offers poetry without planning it, I'm told a member of Maya's family purchased a Porsche from Apex Ridge's flagship store this very afternoon. Mr. Bennett, the Porsche you bought came from your daughter's company." Heads turned toward table 12. Dad's hand jerked. The black key fob slid from his fingers, clipped the edge of his plate, and hit the marble with a sharp plastic crack. A server bent to retrieve it, but Dad did not move. All the color had left his face. Lauren's eyes dropped to her employee badge still clipped inside her evening bag, then returned to me with the first trace of fear I had ever seen there. The walk to the stage was less than 30 feet. It felt longer than the 5 years since the kitchen table. Evan handed me the award, and flashes burst from the press riser. I looked down at the room, at Nina smiling, at our lenders, at employees who had stayed through payroll scares and failed pilots, and finally, at Dad. He was no longer looking through me. That should have tasted like victory. Instead, grief moved through me so cleanly that I nearly lost my first line. I tightened my hand around the glass award and said, "Northline was built by people who kept moving when the route they were promised disappeared." My voice steadied. I thanked our drivers, engineers, service technicians, investors, and the Apex Ridge employees whose jobs we intended to protect. I did not mention the bus. I did not mention my family. I refused to turn the work of hundreds of people into a public argument with 2. When I left the stage, Dad was waiting in the aisle, blocking my path before I could reach my table. Up close, he looked older than he had an hour earlier. "$90 million, he whispered. "You own Apex Ridge." Lauren stepped beside him and attempted a brittle smile. "So this is hilarious. You're technically my boss." I met her eyes. "No, the board is responsible for personnel, and I have recused myself from anything involving you." Her smile vanished. Dad bent to retrieve the key fob a server had placed beside his plate. His hand shook as he closed around it. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. The question carried accusation, not wonder. I looked at the key, then at the man who had used the words "real career" less than 3 hours before. "You never asked," I said. "And tonight, confidentiality mattered more than your opinion." Dad tried to pull me toward an empty corridor, but photographers were already moving between the tables and 2 local business reporters had recognized the family connection. Lauren placed a hand on my arm and lowered her voice. "Maya, whatever this audit thing is, you can make sure it doesn't become weird for me." I removed her hand without making a scene. "It became weird when you asked the incoming CEO to interfere with an independent review." Dad looked over his shoulder, checking who had heard. Then he said the name, Red Mesa Construction. It was the fleet account he had praised from the showroom, a $6.4 million order for trucks and service contracts. He admitted his consulting company had introduced Lauren to Red Mesa's owner, but called that ordinary relationship business. "If it was disclosed and priced correctly, the audit will confirm that," I said. "If it wasn't, my last name will not clean the paper." His face tightened. "After everything we did for you, this is how you speak to your father." I let the silence rest between us. "You told me to take a bus because only one of your daughters had a real career. Do not ask the other daughter to misuse hers before dessert." Nina guided me toward our employees before Dad could answer. I spent the next hour answering questions about service integration, job security, and our plan for the first 100 days. The clip of the key fob had already begun circulating by the time coffee was served. It was only 14 seconds long. Evan's sentence, the plastic crack against stone, Dad's white face, and Lauren's abandoned smile. A local finance reporter posted it with the acquisition announcement, and people who had ignored Northline for years suddenly knew both my company's valuation and my father's afternoon priorities. I did not share the video. I did not have to. 3 men from Dad's old logistics network were in the ballroom. I watched one begin walking toward him, reconsider, and turn toward another table. Public humiliation was not a tactic I had planned, but pride had made him choose a public room for his contempt. The room simply returned it. At 8 Monday morning, Apex Ridge's board, not me, ordered a 30-day review of commissions, referral payments, employee discounts, and related party accounts. 23 files were flagged. 4 employees were placed on paid administrative leave while their records were examined. Lauren was one of them. The review protocol had been approved 6 weeks before closing and loaded into the transition plan. Execution merely waited for ownership to change. At 8:19, Lauren called me 12 times. At 8:31, Dad began. I sent them the same sentence. "I am recused." Direct questions to Human Resources or independent counsel. By Wednesday, the review had found that Red Mesa was not the triumph Lauren had described. A junior representative named Tessa Moore had logged the account, conducted 4 months of work, and built the original proposal. After Dad arranged a golf weekend with Red Mesa's owner, Lauren persuaded a former sales vice president to reassign the account to her. She then authorized a $48,000 market access fee to Bennett Fleet Advisory, Dad's company, without listing the payee as an immediate family member. The contract also assumed resale values on 70 vehicles that were $415,000 higher than Apex Ridge's approved model. That change made the client's monthly price look unbeatable while shifting the future loss onto the company. Lauren booked her commission before final credit approval and received a $24,000 advance. The Red Mesa owner, alarmed by the audit, suspended the order. Priya sent the findings to the audit committee. The committee retained outside counsel. Counsel preserved the records and interviewed everyone. I wanted consequences tied to choices, not my anger. On Thursday, Lauren entered a glass conference room while coworkers watched HR close the blinds. Industry gossip moved faster than official notice. By evening, 2 recruiters removed endorsements from her profile. Dad's largest client paused its contract after learning his firm accepted an undisclosed fee from a seller it was supposed to evaluate independently. Dad finally left a voicemail without shouting. He said Lauren's mortgage pre-approval depended on the commission, his Porsche payments assumed she would reimburse him, and one audit could destroy both of them. I listened twice, noticing that he still had not asked whether I was all right. He only wanted the daughter he had dismissed to become useful. I called back once. "I did not create the records," I told him. "I will not erase them." He said family should protect family. "Protection is not falsifying an audit," I replied. "You are not being punished because I became powerful. You are being exposed because you assumed I never would." Then I ended the call. 2 weeks after the gala, Dad and Lauren appeared unannounced in Northline's lobby at 6:30 in the evening. Security would not send them upstairs, so they waited beneath the company logo while employees left for the day. The timing delivered one humiliation Dad could not hide. Owen Mercer, a fleet operations manager Dad had fired years earlier in front of an entire warehouse and called too timid for leadership, stepped out of the elevator after a transition meeting. Owen now ran service integration for one of our largest customers. He recognized Dad, noticed the visitor badge, and offered me a calm good night as I came downstairs. He did not gloat. That made Dad shrink more than ridicule would have. The man he had once made powerless had access to my executive floor. Dad did not. I took them into a private conference room. Lauren looked as if she had not slept. Dad placed the Porsche key on the table as though it were evidence against me. The audit committee had completed her case that morning. Apex Ridge terminated her for failing to disclose the referral relationship, manipulating forecasts, and claiming another employee's account. Her commission was canceled, and the $24,000 advance became repayable under her compensation agreement. Tessa received the account if Red Mesa returned. Dad's $48,000 fee was frozen pending repayment, and Bennett Fleet Advisory was removed from Apex Ridge's vendor list for 3 years. Because the contract had stopped before funding and the fee could be returned, the board chose civil recovery and professional sanctions instead of prosecution. Lauren began with anger. She said every sales office reassigned accounts, every consultant opened doors, and I had bought the company knowing she worked there. Then fear broke through. "You could have warned me." I reminded her that warning one employee about a confidential acquisition would have violated securities and lender restrictions. She stared at the table. Dad stepped in and offered a new version of the past. He said he had always known I was brilliant, that his criticism had been intended to make me tougher, and that buying Lauren cars was simply his way of supporting the child who needed visible encouragement. The lie was almost elegant. I opened the old message on my phone and slid it across the table. "Can't risk my credit on a software hobby." His own words sat between the Porsche key and the audit notice. "I did not need you to finance Northline," I said. "I found another way. I wanted you to read 4 pages and believe me for 10 minutes. At the gala, I did not need a chauffeur. I wanted my father to keep his promise and drive me." My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated that it did. For 2 weeks, I had been the controlled chief executive in every public conversation. In that room, I was also the daughter who had stood in a navy dress listening to showroom laughter. I looked at Lauren. "And when he said you had a real career, part of me still waited for you to correct him." She wiped beneath one eye, then lifted her chin. "Maybe I thought you did not need defending." That is the sentence people use when they want the benefits of a strong woman without the obligation to care for her. Lauren insisted she could have another executive sales job within a week. Then she admitted she had never built a major account without Dad arranging an introduction or a manager giving her someone else's pipeline. She knew how to enter a room and close when the structure favored her. She did not know how to start cold, survive rejection, or defend her numbers alone. Our father had not prepared her for a career. He had prepared an audience. The realization made her cry harder, and I felt no triumph. She had weaponized the favoritism, but also built her identity inside it. Losing the stage exposed how little stood underneath. Dad ignored her tears and asked me to call the board chair. One sentence from me, he said, could preserve her reference, restore part of the commission, and keep his vendor status. You are asking me to risk hundreds of employees, our lenders, and my own integrity, so neither of you has to feel the cost of what you signed. He called that cold. I answered more softly than he deserved. Cold was telling your daughter to take a bus while you financed proof that the other one mattered. This is accounting. I pushed the Porsche key back toward him. Take it. I do not want the car. I do not want your company. I do not want an apology designed to reopen your credit line. I want distance. The financial fall took 6 ugly weeks. Dad repaid the referral fee from his business reserve just as 2 clients suspended him. The Porsche loan remained. An $18,000 down payment gone, $76,000 financed, and a new car worth less than its balance. He had assumed Lauren's commission would cover it. When the second payment failed, collections began calling. He sold the Macan through Apex Ridge's wholesale channel and learned that taxes, fees, and depreciation left a $14,000 deficiency. To clear it and replace the referral payment, he consigned the restored 1968 Corvette he had displayed at charity shows for 17 years. Kevin Laird, one of Dad's former directors, was collecting a service vehicle when the Corvette arrived on a flatbed. Kevin had once heard Dad say financial trouble was what happened to people without discipline. He said nothing cruel, only asked whether everything was all right. Dad later called it the most humiliating moment of his life. By month's end, both cars were gone. His consultancy lost 3 more accounts, and the Austin Transportation Council asked him to leave its sponsorship committee. The people he had impressed now knew why the Porsche had vanished. The key cost him the car, his favorite possession, his clients, and a reputation polished for 30 years. I gave Dad and Lauren one boundary in writing: 90 days without visits, calls, or messages through friends. Necessary financial communication could go through counsel. Anything personal could wait. Dad violated it twice in the first week, then stopped when security turned him away. A month later, he mailed a letter to my office. It did not say only that he had been wrong. It said, "I mistook Lauren's dependence for promise and your competence for permission to neglect you. I made your strength an excuse for my cruelty. When your success became visible, I wanted credit for it and protection from it. I am ashamed that losing status taught me what loving my daughter should have taught me." I left the letter sealed in my desk for 12 days before reading it. Even then, I did not call. A precise apology could name damage. It could not reverse it. Lauren discovered that the network she thought she owned had belonged mostly to Dad and Apex Ridge. 3 dealerships rejected her application after employment verification. 2 clients declined private meetings. Eventually, she accepted an inside sales position at a warehouse safety supplier for $46,000 a year, less than half her previous base and without a guaranteed commission draw. She rented a room in Round Rock, built her own prospect list, and spent mornings making calls no one returned. It was not glamorous, and no one photographed it. 6 months later, she sent Tessa a written apology and began repaying the commission advance in installments. I respected the action without reopening the relationship. Dad sold his country club membership, closed Bennett Fleet Advisory, and took contract work reviewing maintenance invoices from a spare bedroom. Friends who had applauded his stories at the gala asked careful questions about the viral clip and the conflict review. He stopped attending industry dinners rather than answer. The consequences followed them after the shock faded, which was exactly what the old family system had prevented. For once, I did not absorb the bill, soften the story, or help either of them escape the first uncomfortable version of themselves. Distance was not a dramatic punishment. It was the quiet decision to stop serving as the emergency exit from problems they had built. 9 months after the gala, Apex Ridge no longer looked like a trophy acquisition. It looked like a working company. Northline connected its platform to all 4 service centers, cut the average fleet repair wait from 9 days to 4, and made 2 underperforming dealerships profitable without eliminating a technician position. Customer retention rose 18%. We preserved 186 jobs, then added 32 apprenticeships with Austin Community College. The pension fund invested another $20 million in our service network. Business journals began asking competitors how they planned to catch us. I did not win because my father was embarrassed. I won because the acquisition worked. At our first annual employee meeting after integration, Tessa stood on stage and presented the recovered Red Mesa account. She had rebuilt the proposal using honest residual values, reduced the order to 62 vehicles, and still produced a profitable contract. The applause she received was not borrowed. I watched from the side instead of taking the microphone. That moment mattered more to me than seeing Lauren fired because it showed what justice looked like after anger. Credit returned to the person who had earned it, a damaged deal repaired, and a company made safer for whoever came next. When the 90-day boundary ended, I agreed to separate 1-hour conversations with Dad and Lauren in a therapist's office. I did not promise forgiveness, holidays, or access to my company. Dad arrived without advice. Lauren arrived without asking me for a reference. That was enough for a first meeting and not enough to erase anything. Our relationship remained distant. Sometimes growth is not a reunion. Sometimes it is finally refusing to call limited contact a tragedy. Dad once told me he had replayed the sound of the key fob hitting the floor until he understood that his face had gone white, not because I had deceived him, but because the hierarchy he relied on had vanished in public. I told him the hierarchy had always been imaginary. Money merely made it visible to him. The Glass Award now sits in my office beside the signed acquisition binder. Behind it, almost hidden, is the paper transfer the bus driver handed me that night. It cost $2.50. I kept it because it marks the last time I traveled toward my own achievement, still hoping someone else's approval would make it real. I could buy a dozen Porsches now. I have not bought one. What I wanted was never a luxury car. It was equal regard, a kept promise, and a father who could see effort before a host announced its price. Once I understood that, his withholding stopped controlling me. Dad lost the Porsche, the Corvette, his consultancy, and the public authority he valued more than tenderness. Lauren lost her title, her commission, her borrowed clients, and the illusion that access was talent. I lost something too. The fantasy that one spectacular victory could repair a childhood. But what replaced that fantasy was stronger. I had a company whose numbers survived scrutiny, colleagues who knew exactly what I had built, and boundaries that did not disappear when someone called me cold. The bus ride was not my humiliation. It was the final receipt from a family system I no longer financed. On some evenings, the office glass reflects my name from the brass plaque on the door. Maya Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. The old transfer sits beneath it, small and ordinary, while 12 dealerships report into the company I built after my father refused to risk $60,000 on my future. The Porsche key was gone. The company remained. So did I. What was the moment you stopped auditioning for love from people committed to misunderstanding you? And what boundary did you set afterward? Tell me in the comments. I will be reading.
Thank you for watching another emotional story from our channel. Everything here is fictional and made only for storytelling, entertainment, and education. We hope it reminds you that people who truly respect you will not need a critics to start treating you well. Respect that only appears when you are leaving may not be respect at all. It may simply be fear of losing control.